Founder Suge Knight had a lot to say about the Tupac Shakur murder trial during a jailhouse interview with TMZ. Knight was in the car with Tupac the night he was shot on the Strip in September of 1996.
Right now, today, he is the only man alive who watched Tupac Shakur die. He was 2 feet away when 13 rounds tore through a BMW on the Las Vegas Strip. He felt shrapnel hit his own skull. And for 30 years, Suge Knight has said almost nothing about that night. Now, with a jury being seated less than a mile from where it happened, he finally picked up a phone from inside a California prison cell. What came out was not a confession. It was not even close. It was a warning wrapped in silence. And it might be the most revealing thing he has ever said, precisely because of what he refused to say. In the second week of August 2026, as attorneys in Las Vegas began questioning a pool of 75 potential jurors, Marion Suge Knight gave an interview to ABC News from the prison where he is serving a 28-year sentence. He is 61 years old now. The man once known as the most feared executive in music sat behind bars for a fatal 2015 hit-and-run in Compton, and he will likely die in custody. He has nothing left to negotiate for and nothing left to protect except one thing: his own code. Everyone watching the case expected Knight to either stay silent, as he has for 3 decades, or finally break and name names. He did neither. Instead, he drew a line and dared anyone to cross it. This trial has nothing to do with me. And if somebody brings me there, it's gonna hurt whoever brings me there. I promise you that, he told ABC News. He went further, telling the network exactly what he thought of being pulled in by either side of the case. They make me come there against my will. If Keffe D's lawyers bring me there, it don't look good for him. If the prosecution brings me there, it don't look good for them. Leave me out of it. Read that again slowly, because it is not the language of someone protecting himself. It is the language of someone who believes he still has leverage over a case that has consumed the hip-hop world for 3 decades. Knight is on the prosecution's witness list. If a judge orders him to appear, he will have no legal choice but to sit in that chair. But everyone connected to this trial understands that forcing Suge Knight onto a witness stand and getting him to say anything useful are 2 entirely different problems, and his interview made that painfully clear. A day after the ABC News interview aired, Knight spoke to TMZ from the same prison, and this time his language shifted from defensive to something closer to defiant. He called the killing of Tupac Shakur an assassination, a word he had avoided using publicly for years. And then he said something that should have been the biggest headline of the week. The public, he claimed, has had the story wrong for almost 30 years. He said people were mistaken to believe Tupac was killed simply over a stolen chain or gang colors. He said the man now on trial, Dwayne Keffe D Davis, was not the only person involved in what happened that night. And then, in the same breath, he stopped. He did not name who else was involved. He did not explain what the real motive was. He left the sentence hanging there, a half-open door that he then closed himself, because opening it further would mean doing the one thing he has built his entire identity around never doing: testifying against someone. Knight explained his reasoning in terms that felt almost like a personal philosophy carved out of 30 years in and around gang culture and the music industry. To actually get on the stand and point somebody out, it's worse than taking a gun and shooting that man in the head, he said. Because if you shoot a person in the head, they die once. If you get on the stand and you snitch on that person, they die 1,000,000 times. He added something that sounded less like bravado and more like a genuine burden he has carried since 1996. I am not going to be responsible for sending another man to prison for the rest of his life. There is a bitter irony buried in that statement, because Suge Knight is already responsible for sending himself to prison for the rest of his own life over an unrelated killing 9 years ago. He is speaking about loyalty and mercy from inside a cell that exists because he showed neither behind the wheel of his own vehicle in 2015. But whatever contradictions exist in the man, his position on this specific case has never wavered. My loyalty to Tupac can never be compromised, he told ABC News. Me as a man, what I believe in, can't be compromised. To understand why Knight's silence carries so much weight, you have to go back to September 7th, 1996, a night that began as one of the biggest celebrations in West Coast hip-hop history and ended as its darkest chapter. Las Vegas was packed for a heavyweight fight between Mike Tyson and Bruce Seldon at the MGM Grand. Tupac Shakur and Suge Knight had prime seats. Tyson finished Seldon in the first round, and as thousands of fans and industry figures poured out of the arena and into the casino lobby, another fight broke out, one that had nothing to do with boxing. Tupac and Knight ran into Orlando Baby Lane Anderson, a young member of the Southside Compton Crips, who also happened to be the nephew of the man now standing trial, Dwayne Davis. Months earlier, Anderson and a group of Crips had allegedly jumped a death row associate and stolen a gold pendant bearing the label's logo, an act that in that world was treated as an open provocation. When Tupac spotted Anderson in the MGM lobby, he did not hesitate. He crossed the room and threw the first punch. Knight and several others joined in. Hotel security cameras captured the entire beating, footage that would circle the country on every news broadcast within days. Hours later, Tupac and Knight climbed into a black BMW, Knight behind the wheel, and headed toward a club on East Flamingo Road that Knight owned, where Tupac was expected to make an appearance. A convoy of death row vehicles trailed behind them. At a red light at the intersection of Flamingo and Koval Lane, a white Cadillac pulled up beside the BMW. Gunfire erupted from inside it. Tupac was hit multiple times. Knight was struck by shrapnel. He made a U-turn on blown tires and raced toward help with a dying man beside him. Tupac Shakur died 6 days later at the age of 25. The case went cold almost immediately, staying that way for the next 27 years. Most cold cases fade from public memory long before they reach a courtroom. This one never did, and the reason has almost nothing to do with the mechanics of the investigation itself. Tupac Shakur was 25 years old when he died, and in the years since, his catalog has only grown more influential, his image more permanent, his death more mythologized by a generation that was not even alive to witness it in real time. Documentaries, biopics, academic courses, museum exhibits, and an entire subculture of amateur investigators have kept the case alive online in ways that almost no other unsolved murder in American history has managed to sustain. Every few years, a new piece of the story resurfaces, a new interview, a new court filing, a new name whispered in a podcast, and the public reaction is always the same. Renewed hope that this might finally be the moment the full truth comes out. That hope explains why Suge Knight's brief interview last week generated so much attention despite containing, when examined closely, almost no new information. People were not really listening for facts. They were listening for confirmation that someone, anyone, connected to that car on September 7, 1996, was finally ready to talk. Knight understood that hunger perfectly well when he picked up that phone, and he used it, giving just enough to dominate headlines for days, while ultimately revealing nothing that moves this case forward in any legal sense. It was, in its own way, a masterclass in controlling a narrative from inside a prison cell, using 30 years of built-up public curiosity as leverage without ever having to answer a single hard question under oath. To understand why his silence carries the weight it does, you have to understand who Suge Knight was before any of this happened. In the early 1990s, he built Death Row Records into the most dominant and most feared label in American music, home to Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, and eventually Tupac Shakur himself. He did not build that empire through charm. He built it through fear, through intimidation, through a reputation for pressure tactics that followed him into every boardroom and every recording session. People who worked with him over the years have described an atmosphere at Death Row that blurred the line between a record label and a street organization, where business disputes were settled the way disputes were settled on the streets of Compton, not in Los Angeles courtrooms. That reputation is exactly why his relationship with Tupac mattered so much. When Knight posted bail for Tupac in October 1995, freeing him from a New York prison while he appealed a sexual assault conviction he always denied, it was widely understood in the industry as a transaction, not an act of charity. Tupac owed Death Row albums. He owed Knight loyalty, and for the 11 months between his release and his death, Tupac became the most visible symbol of everything Death Row represented, an artist who recorded at a blistering pace, feuded publicly with rivals on the East Coast, and lived every day as if he already knew how little time he had left. Knight's own criminal history did not end with Tupac's murder. He has spent much of the past 3 decades cycling in and out of custody for parole violations and assault-related charges, culminating in the 2015 fatal hit-and-run that put him away for good. Death Row Records collapsed into bankruptcy years ago. The empire he built is gone. What remains is a man in his 60s, isolated inside a California prison, whose only real currency left in this world is the story he has never fully told. What eventually broke the case open was not new forensic evidence or a surprise witness. It was Dwayne Keffe D Davis himself, who spent roughly 2 decades publicly describing his own alleged role in the murder across interviews, a documentary series, and a 2019 memoir titled Compton Street Legend, co-written with author Yusuf Jah. In that book and in multiple television appearances, Davis described being present for the planning of the shooting and detailed how the weapon used in the killing was obtained. He was arrested in Henderson, Nevada, on September 29, 2023, and has been held in custody since. He is charged with a single count of murder with a deadly weapon, tied to allegations that he acted to promote or assist a criminal gang, but prosecutors have never accused him of pulling the trigger himself. He has pleaded not guilty. His legal strategy since his arrest has centered on undoing everything he said publicly for 20 years, arguing in a 2025 jailhouse interview with ABC News that he never actually wrote or even read the memoir that bears his name. "I've never read the book," Davis said. "I just gave him details of my life, and he went and did his little investigation and wrote the book on his own." In that same interview and others, Davis insisted flatly, "I'm innocent. I ain't killed nobody, never did ever kill nobody," and claimed his years of public confessions were financially motivated, something he said again as recently as this year, describing his past remarks as fabrications made for money. His legal team has also tried to have the case dismissed entirely, arguing that a 2008 proffer agreement Davis made with a federal and Los Angeles task force investigating the murder of Notorious B.I.G. should have shielded him from prosecution in Nevada. A judge disagreed, ruling that Nevada authorities were never bound by an agreement made with a different jurisdiction for a different case. Davis's defense has also pushed for delays, citing a private investigator who they say identified new witnesses who could support an alibi, placing him outside Las Vegas that night, and pointing toward what his attorney has vaguely described as other individuals who may have orchestrated the shooting. Prosecutors, for their part, say they have evidence placing Davis in Las Vegas that night regardless of what he now claims. While Knight has been giving interviews from behind bars, the actual machinery of the Davis trial has been grinding forward in Las Vegas. Judge Carly Kearney spent the opening days of proceedings walking a pool of 75 potential jurors through questions about medical conditions, language barriers, and personal familiarity with the case, a necessary but painstaking process, given how famous the underlying murder remains 3 decades later. Attorneys on both sides know that finding 12 people in Clark County who have never heard of Tupac Shakur's death is close to impossible. What they are really searching for are jurors who can set aside what they think they already know and evaluate the evidence as it is actually presented in court. Davis has sat quietly beside his attorney through each session, a stark contrast to the man who spent 2 decades narrating his own alleged crimes to television cameras and book publishers. His legal team has spent the pretrial period trying to strip away exactly the material that made this case prosecutable in the first place, arguing that his memoir, his docuseries appearances, and his recorded interviews should never have been treated as confessions rather than as commercial storytelling designed to sell books and boost his profile in true crime circles. Prosecutors have countered that a man does not need to be under oath to incriminate himself, and that 2 decades of consistent, detailed public statements carry their own weight regardless of what Davis claims about his motivations now. The trial itself is expected to stretch across roughly 4 weeks, an unusually long timeline for a case built on so little physical evidence. Prosecutors have indicated they intend to call somewhere between 35 and 45 witnesses, ranging from people who were present at the MGM Grand the night of the fight, to law enforcement officials who worked the case across multiple decades, to individuals connected to Death Row Records during that era. Whether Suge Knight ultimately takes the stand among them remains one of the most closely watched questions of the entire proceeding, not because anyone expects him to hand prosecutors a clean narrative, but because his mere presence in that room would be historic regardless of what he says or refuses to say once he gets there. What makes this case genuinely unusual in the history of American criminal trials is that the prosecution has no murder weapon, no recovered vehicle, and no surviving alleged accomplice willing to testify. Orlando Anderson, the man widely believed by investigators to have fired the fatal shots, was killed in an unrelated gang shooting in Compton in 1998, less than 2 years after Tupac's death. The prosecution's case instead leans heavily on Davis's own decades of public statements, media appearances, and his own memoir, material that Judge Carly Kearney has already ruled can be used as evidence, despite defense objections that it amounts to nothing more than a paid storyteller's exaggerations. Suge Knight sits at the center of that witness list without ever intending to be there. He was inside the car. He is the only person left who can describe, second by second, what happened at that intersection, and he has made it unmistakably clear that if he is forced to appear, it will not be to help either side make its case. It will be, in his words, to make sure neither side benefits from having brought him there at all. It is a strange position for a witness to take publicly before ever setting foot in the courtroom, but it fits everything Knight has represented for 30 years. A man who plays entirely by his own rules, even when those rules put him directly at odds with the pursuit of justice for someone he claims to have loved like family. Tupac Shakur's family has spent 30 years watching this case move at a pace that has felt, to them, almost cruel. His mother, Keffe D Shakur, who spent decades pushing to protect her son's legacy and his catalog, died in 2016 without ever seeing anyone charged in connection with his murder. Other family members have continued pursuing the case in the years since, including reportedly retaining legal counsel to explore financial and legal avenues connected to allegations that have circulated for years about who may have helped finance the killing. For them, this trial represents something that once felt impossible: an actual courtroom, an actual defendant, an actual chance at something resembling closure, even if that closure comes without the participation of the one man who watched it all happen. That is part of what makes Knight's silence so difficult for outside observers to fully reconcile. He describes his own loyalty to Tupac in almost sacred terms, insisting that speaking against anyone connected to the case would betray a bond he still honors decades later. But that same loyalty, as he defines it, apparently does not extend to helping secure whatever justice remains available for the man he says he still thinks about every day. It is possible to hold both truths at once: that Knight genuinely mourns his friend, and that his code of silence, whatever its origins, works against anything resembling accountability for that friend's death. Long before this trial began, Davis himself introduced another name into the case during that same 2008 proffer session with federal investigators, one that has nothing to do with Orlando Anderson or the Crips. According to court filings and reporting that has surfaced in the years since, Davis alleged that music mogul Sean Diddy Combs offered a substantial cash bounty for information leading to harm against both Tupac and Suge Knight, a claim that has never resulted in charges against Combs, and that Combs has consistently and firmly denied. Las Vegas police have stated on the record that Combs has never been considered a suspect in the case. Still, the allegation has resurfaced repeatedly in later interviews, documents, and podcast appearances involving people connected to death row records, keeping Combs's name attached to the periphery of a case he has never been formally tied to by any court. Knight has referenced this allegation publicly on multiple occasions over the years, framing it as something the industry has quietly understood for decades, even as it never became part of any official prosecution. Whether that belief holds up under legal scrutiny or remains permanently in the realm of unproven allegation is a separate question from what this trial is actually about, and it is worth being clear that no court has ever validated it as fact. It exists in this story the way so much of the Tupac case exists, as something everyone in that world seems to have heard, repeated by people close to it, but never proven in a courtroom. For a case already defined by decades of rumor and half-confirmed detail, it is one more thread that will likely remain permanently unresolved long after this particular trial reaches its verdict. Even if Dwayne Davis is convicted at the end of this trial, it will not answer every question this case has raised. He has never been accused of pulling the trigger himself, The man investigators believe fired the fatal shots died in an unrelated shooting in 1998, long before any of this evidence became public. A conviction of Davis would close the only prosecutable thread left in a case that has already lost its most direct participant to violence of his own. It would not resolve the allegations involving other names that have surfaced and resurfaced over the years, allegations that remain, by every account, unproven and unlikely to ever reach a courtroom, given the passage of time and the death or silence of nearly everyone who might testify to them. That is the strange shape of justice in a case this old. The public wants a single, complete answer. Who killed Tupac Shakur, and why? What this trial can actually deliver is much narrower. A verdict on one man's role in orchestrating an attack, built almost entirely on that man's own words rather than physical proof. Whether that is enough to satisfy 3 decades of speculation, documentaries, podcasts, and grieving fans is a question no jury verdict can fully answer, no matter which way it goes. And if Davis is acquitted instead, the case very likely returns to exactly where it sat for 27 years before his arrest, unsolved, unresolved, and depended entirely on the continued silence of the one man who was actually there. There's a temptation to view Suge Knight's refusal to talk as either cowardice or as a criminal protecting himself. Both explanations miss what he has said, consistently, for 3 decades. He does not deny knowing more than he has ever revealed. He does not deny having opinions about who else was involved beyond the man currently on trial. What he denies is any obligation to hand that knowledge to a courtroom, a police department, or a camera crew, because in the world he came up in, the world of Compton streets and the earliest days of death row records, cooperating with law enforcement against another man is treated as a betrayal worse than violence itself. That code has cost him things most people would consider unthinkable to sacrifice. It may have cost investigators their best chance at fully closing this case decades ago, and it will almost certainly define how this trial plays out, because if Suge Knight is called to that witness stand in the coming weeks, everyone in that courtroom already knows what they are going to get. A man willing to describe his loyalty in vivid detail, and absolutely nothing else. He has already told us as much, days before jury selection even finished. He is not hiding what he believes. He is simply telling everyone, in advance, that the truth he carries is staying exactly where it has been for 30 years, locked behind the same silence that has protected him and condemned this case to remain half-solved for a generation. 30 years from now, people will likely still be asking the same questions they are asking today, and the man who could answer most of them will, by every indication, still be choosing silence over truth. Drop a comment and tell us what you think. Do you believe Suge Knight actually knows the full truth about who ordered Tupac's murder? Or is his silence covering for something closer to himself than anyone realizes?